Hello. The question for today is, can you turn on joy? And what does it matter for your relationships? Can you turn on joy and what does it matter? How do you know when your joy switch is turned off? We're going to talk about how can you turn it back on and then how this joy switch might transform your life. I'm Jeff Holzclaw, and this is the Being With podcast, a podcast on neuroscience and faith brought to you by Grassroots Christianity, where we seek to grow faith for everyday people. And today, I'm bringing to you Chris Coursey, who has just written a book called How the Joy Switch, How Your Brain's Secret Circuit Affects Your Relationships and How You Can Activate It Again. Chris, thanks for being here.
Hey, thank you. It's good to be here. I'm looking forward to our time.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris leads and designs the Thrive trainings that uses creative interactive exercises to train leaders in the I would say essential brain skills, relational brain skills that produce joyful character and lasting change in our lives. And you can check that out in the show notes. It's Thrive. What's the website?
I didn't write ThriveToday.org.
That's what it is. ThriveToday.org. So, Chris, just to jump in, how did you get interested in neuroscience and what does that mean for your life? Like, how have things changed because of these things?
Oh man, neuroscience is honestly, it's a game changer. In 1997, I had a chance to do an internship with a recovery ministry, and I came across a book called Living from the Heart Jesus Gave You. It was actually a manuscript. It was in a folder. It was, I believe, just about to be published. And one of the authors was a guy by the name of Dr. Jim Wilder. And when I read this book, it just explained my life and explained those that I was meeting with a history of severe trauma. So I had the chance to meet Dr. Jim Wilder, and our paths crossed. And he basically just took this, what was revolutionary brain science at the time from a guy by the name of Dr. Alan Shore from UCLA. And when I heard Jim Wilder share this brain science, basically saying that our brain runs best on joy, it just resonated with me. I looked back on my life and I could see times where joy levels were high, joy levels were low. And it was those low times where I was really the most vulnerable to addictions and just all kinds of unhelpful behavior. So I basically started diving into the deep ocean of brain science from that point on. And I've never looked back. It has just been really revolutionary learning how God designed the brain to work.
Yeah. And you've spent quite a while with Thrive Today, and developed kind of trainings around these relational kind of skills, which are different than like spiritual formation skills, but they're related. Could you just say something really quick about that? How does spiritual formation and those practices like Bible reading, Lectio Divina, the examine, fasting, all those types of things, how they might, not always get at the things that we need because we lack some other relational skills?
Yeah. So one of the things I learned working with Jim was, the first 3 years of life, your brain has to learn, it's supposed to learn a bunch of crucial relational skills, which really help you to be a protector instead of a predator, which helps you recover when things go wrong, all kinds of things. We call them the 19 skills. And we started testing, basically training these skills in about 2001. So if I didn't learn these skills in those crucial periods where your brain's developing, the good news is we could still learn them later in life. And so I embarked on this journey called Thrive Training, where we started to train relational skills to people who either wanted to strengthen or really learn new skills if they just weren't there. So it fits really well with spiritual formation because what it does is I call it helps you to be in your relational sweet spot. So there's a relational engine, so to speak, on the right side of your brain. And when this relational engine is working, I'm in a very sweet relational place. I feel like interacting. And when this relational engine or this relational circuit is offline, I don't want to interact with people. God feels distant. All kinds of unwanted things happen. So what I found in basically training people in relational skills, they find that they get more out of the disciplines, for example, when they find that they're in the relational sweet spot. So I might have an awareness, more of an awareness of God's peace and God's presence when this relational circuit is on. When the relational circuit is off, it just feels like my prayers are bumping on the ceiling and dropping back down. I just feel basically relationally disconnected from my loved ones, from people, as well as from the God that I love. So people just get more out of the spiritual disciplines when they find that this relational engine is actually online and working. It's kind of like a light switch, Jeff. It could be on, and I'm very relational, and I can put myself in your shoes. I can see when I'm overwhelming you. All kinds of these relational things can happen. But if it's offline, I run people over and don't even realize it, or I just don't care.
Sure. Well, and you guys, along with another co-author, wrote a book called Relational Skills in the Bible. And Sid and I took our church that we helped to pastor through that, not this fall, but the previous fall. And that was really great. But that's not why we want to zoom in. That's not why we're talking with you today. Although I'll put this in the show notes. Relational Skills in the Bible kind of goes through that. And you have extensive trainings that you offer to go through all 19 skills.
Yeah.
But one of the skills, or rather, it's almost not a skill. It's kind of a skill, but it's also just like the brute reality, is this thing that you call the joy switch. And you just finished writing a book, Joy Switch, How Your Brain's Secret Circuit Affects Your Relationships and How You Can Activate It. So can you just tell us, what is this joy switch? What is that? Is there a little toggle in my head that goes up and down?
Well, joy switch is kind of a word picture I came up with to describe how do we activate this relational circuit or this relational engine. Some of the newer cars have a push button start. The ignition is just, you push a button and the engine starts. So the joy switch is kind of this ignition button that we have to press in order to activate this relational circuit. So in the book, I just go through some very practical ways. How can we learn to use the joy switch? So for example, if I'm in a bad mood when my wife and sons come home, maybe, at the end of the day, if my relational circuit is offline, I would use the joy switch to get back online. And in the in the book, I call it CARS, CARS, which is stand for connecting, appreciating, resting, and shalom for my body. So those are ways that I can get relational. Some people, they just want to go for a walk outside. They want to be in nature. They spend time with their pet. It's basically the things that bring some peace to you that help quiet your mind and your body. And this relational circuit really is designed to come online when you're expecting joy. So when you're anticipating a joyful response, this relational circuit would come on, and it goes off when something goes wrong. Maybe you get upset, you're driving down the road, somebody cuts in front of you, gives you a special hand gesture, and you go from enjoying your drive to all of a sudden your brain focuses on a problem. And at that point, your relational circuit's off, and the joy switch would be maybe taking a deep breath or remembering something that makes you smile, remembering appreciation. Or even just trying to talk to God and calm down. Even though I might not have an awareness of his presence, I could still tell him why I am upset. And I sure could use some of his peace, and maybe even this other driver could have some of his peace. And as I share mine, so to speak, with God or with the Lord, what happens is that can also help your relational circuit come on. So the joy switch is really the light switch that turns on the light. And in this case, what we're trying to turn on is this relational engine on the right side of your brain that, is very much there to keep you in your sweet spot. But it's also there if you have to solve a problem. So your brain basically turns off some of the areas that you just don't need in the moment so that you can solve a problem like a threat. And this happens really quickly, Jeff. So we have to learn, how do we get back into a relational place or a relational mode so that we can, our character can shine. We can be more like Jesus and basically just kind of be in our relational sweet spot.
All right. So you kind of gave us a couple of the ways to get back into relational mode or turn the switch back on, which I want to circle back to. But could you kind of maybe fill out a little bit more, either personally or just generally? Like what kind of people do we become when the joy switch is turned off? What are our tendencies? What are our behaviors? How do we view other people? Could you just fill that out a little bit?
Yeah, good question. So, personally, for me, the first thing I notice is I lose my peace. So my peace just flies out the window, and I suddenly feel tense. Maybe I'm anxious. Maybe I'm mad. I feel rigid. And what happens is, whatever I'm upset about is what really dominates my thoughts. So I'm focused on the problem. I lose that awareness, maybe that my wife and sons are in the car when I'm focused on that bad driver who cut me off. Sometimes I can lose the filter. So things fly out of my mouth. I wish I could kind of hit the backspace on or white out and, take it back.
So, like, if you're in the car, let's just fill this out, because this has happened to me. This has happened to you. This might be happening to people that are listening live. Some are listening live and others listening recorded. You're in the car. Someone cuts you off. You're like, maybe you don't even shout or flip them off, but your circuit is flipped off. You become a little irritable and you forget that you just left for your family vacation. Your whole family's in your car. Now your switch is off. Something like your kids start playing with each other and they're really loud. If your switch was on, you might not be bothered by it. But now that it's off because that driver cut you off, now you're more likely to snap at the kids or snap at your wife to tell the kids to shut up. And why do they always have to be so loud? And then she gets upset and you get upset. And all of a sudden the whole car's on the fire on the inside because your relational switch was off. Is it something like that?
Oh, you described it well. I mean, that's it. And it's not fun for anybody in the car at that moment, because my wife can see that I'm tense. I'm shallow breathing. My sons can just feel it in the air. Yeah, I snap. I snap at people. I grump, and just little things bother me. You really quickly can become rigid, which is might be outside of your character. You might be pretty relaxed, easygoing guy, but when that relational circuit goes off, you're no longer in that sweet spot, and you're kind of amplifying negativity in some ways.
So then you're in the car, the kids were bothering you, so you missed your exit. If your relational circuit is off, you're more likely to blame your wife or your kids that it's their fault that you missed the exit. Whereas if your relational switch was on, you'd probably just be like, hey, we'll just catch the next one. We'll relocate, we'll just, you take it in stride. But more often when our circuits are off, then it's sometimes it's called enemy mode, or we blame everyone else and we have to protect ourselves. And it just keeps spiraling from there. Are there other ways that we view other people when our switch is off?
I mean, when the switch is off, I'm in my most vulnerable state. So the attributes of my character that I normally can override become more prominent when I'm in enemy mode, when the relational circuit is off. So it's very easy for resentment, hatred, the bad stuff to grow when I'm in this vulnerable state of enemy mode. So the people that I might be able to see kind of how God sees them when I look at them, and maybe I would feel compassion for them. If my relational circuit is on, that flies out the window as well, Jeff. Like when I go into enemy mode, people become problems that need to be fixed or avoided. It is not pretty when you have people who are stuck in enemy mode, and they can have a very distorted reality because all these brain regions or parts that we rely on to update moment by moment, they're on vacation. Like that part of the brain's on the beach in Hawaii somewhere. It's not even present. And so we get stuck in a very rigid place that's just not going to be pretty in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, so true. All right. Well, we filled that out. Now we've bummed everyone out. How do you turn the relational switch back on? And you already covered on the cars and things like that, but what are some of the ways that you can say, I've noticed that my switch is off, which is its own kind of like awareness, right? Like,
yes.
So why don't we start there? How do you just start noticing that your switch is off?
Yeah, here's where the practice is really helpful. Like in the book, I give 19 exercises because at the end of the day, you want this realization to become a habit so that I can recognize when I fell out of my sweet spot, when I slipped and I fell into enemy mode. So the first step to really learn is just to recognize, wow, right now I'm holding my breath. I'm mad. I'm thinking negative thoughts, and there's no peace. So like the first exercise in the book are all about just recognizing, hey, when are you in your sweet spot? When do you fall out? What does it feel like? So we want to get really good at feeling, what is it like in relational mode? What is it like in enemy mode? When I recognize I'm in enemy mode, the goal is to get back to relational mode. Sometimes it's hard, right? Because we're really upset. We don't necessarily know how to stop this train. It's just kind of going out of control. So I encourage people to kind of practice discovering what helps you to calm down and quiet when you're really upset. Like some people, they just want to be heard. So it helps to be with someone who might be able to help you feel seen and heard. Like, wow, you are really upset about this guy cutting you off, aren't you? And that was really bad when he flipped you off. I can see that be upsetting. I can see it on your face, in your voice, like you are mad. So it helps sometimes to be able to basically feel like we're not alone in this. And that's where it helps to have other people that we can interact with. So that's one option. It's just interacting with someone, talking about it, feeling, feeling understood.
Sure. So then that's kind of like an after the fact practice. So, and Josh was commenting on Facebook that we really need to build self-awareness to be able to do this. Like, oh, we just had a big fight. What happened? And you can kind of retroactively fill out the situation. And those things can be hard in the moment. But really you're doing this to help your future self out. Like if you can process what happened in the past, maybe even the next time you won't be able to notice in the moment that your joy switches off. But if you can even analyze it after the fact, you'll get closer, and then eventually you'll notice in the moment, oh, my joy switch is off. I noticed right now that I view you as the problem, that you have screwed it up, and I have to defend and attack and all these types of things. So once you get to that place after building some self-awareness, then what are some of the in the moment practices? I think this is where cars come in that can help us kind of take a pause and move forward. So what are some of those things?
Yeah. So that's where, for example, the appreciation helps. So what I try and do with my family, if they're in the car with me, I will actually verbalize my process with my sons so they can learn from this. And often they'll learn the best from my mistakes. So it's not like we're going to do this well when we first try it. It is going to take practice because your brain's just going to do what it's used to doing, good, bad, or ugly. It's, your brain is a learning machine, right?
Yep.
So I would verbalize to my sons, wow, you guys, did you see that car cut me off? That was frightening, wasn't it? Now I can tell my relational circuit just went off, sons. I'm mad. And I will describe it. Here's what I'm feeling. Here's what I'm seeing. And I'll sanitize in case there's language in my head I don't want, to say out loud to my sons. I would avoid saying that, but I might say, I'm having some really bad thoughts about this driver. And I'll say, now, when I get this mad, here's what helps me. So I'm going to take some real deep breaths right now because your breathing's the first to go. When you get tense, you start shallow breathing. You're no longer breathing deeply. So I would take a couple deep breaths and just, breathe from your belly, deep breaths. And then I would think about what is it that helps me smile and calm down. So I would think about the things that I enjoy. So I might say to my sons, you know what? What helps me when I'm this upset, my relationship gets off, is to appreciate that you guys are with me. I'm really glad that we're going to the park. I look forward to time with you guys. I'm glad we're here. I'm glad we're in this together. It's really good to have you guys here. So now I am shifting my attention to what I enjoy, what I appreciate. So thinking about the good stuff, basically, when you think about the good stuff, your brain responds as though you relive the moment all over again. So if I'm thinking about a memory, and remember last week, guys, when this happened, and you remember how we were able to get through that, you think about the good stuff, your brain will actually, kind of replay that. And so you feel better when you focus on the good stuff. So appreciation is what we'd call that, just remembering joy. I would do that. And I would quiet. So that would be back to the breathing, or I would just tell my sons, okay, daddy just needs to take a breather for a moment. Let's all just take some deep breaths. I'm not going to talk. I just want to quiet. So the skill of quieting ourselves is also really helpful here. Just giving yourself permission to press the pause button. You quiet. And one of the S just stands for basically what we call Shalom My Body exercises. So these are specific exercises that I've learned from Carl Lehman and Jim Wilder, where you can do a couple simple exercises to calm and quiet yourself. One of them is just like yawning. Yawning's actually really good for you. We don't think that it is because we learn it's socially, rude or unacceptable, but yawning's actually really good for your body. So just trying to take some purposeful yawns, and maybe follow it up with, we followed up with a verse that is calming. You could follow it up with something that just is soothing for you, but being purposeful to take some yawns and just try to help quiet your body, and actually can help you get back in your relational seat pretty quickly. But the longer I stay stuck in enemy mode, the deeper the rut. It can be hard to get out of that unless I practice it and then notice, how does it feel when I get back into relational mode? So what do I notice now? And I would definitely verbalize that with my sons. Like, wow, guys, just taking some deep breaths, thinking about something that makes me smile, and being here with you guys really feels good. I'm no longer angry at this driver. I'm feeling some peace, and yeah, my heart's still racing, but the relational switch is now back online. And even though your body still needs to relax, because you probably got a whole lot of cortisol streaming through your bloodstream for a little bit, you are back in your relational place, which you kind of remember who you are and what's important when that relational circuit is back online.
And your relational circuit can turn off not just because of something mean that has happened to someone. It could be turned off because of lack of sleep, you're hungry, you're tired. It could be turned off because you just, you almost got hit by a car and you jumped out of the sidewalk, right? And so there's all sorts of reasons when your fight or flight and freeze kind of survival instincts kick in, it just sucks your brain, all the brain energy down to those lower kind of capacity things and all the relationships. So it's not always just a negative relationship, although so often it is.
Yeah, that's right.
To kind of bring it up to a layer, we're talking about like our relationships with one another, but how does the joy switch being on or off, how does that affect our relationship with God and how we view or interact with God?
That is kind of the $1 million question here, is that this basically this circuit plays a pretty crucial role in my ability to notice, perceive, feel God's peace, and have a sense of God's presence with me in this. Like, when you feel alone in something, that's like the worst condition for your brain to process pain. So the moment you feel alone, those are tough conditions. So what's beautiful about this process and growing in our awareness of God's presence, which I'd consider kind of like a learned skill, we just need a little practice. What happens is when your relational circuit is online, you can learn that skill. So I might believe just from experience that God's mad at me, like just my own personal experience. I might just have the sense that God is angry. And so the moment I think about trying to be close to God, guess what's going to happen? Right? That relational circuit's going to go off because it's like, your brain has an opinion about it. So the goal is learn to keep your relational circuit on as you interact, talk with God, and just, Lord Jesus, where are you? I would love to have your peace right here. Because I know in theory, because the Bible says so, it's true, Jesus is with us all the time. But my experience might tell me otherwise. So learning to keep that relational circuit on gives us an opportunity to practice the skill of noticing God's presence, God's peace in a place. And for most people, who've had difficulty with that, my goal is actually just to help them keep their relational circuit on long enough that they could then notice, okay, what's on God's mind for me? Or what is Jesus doing as I sit here? And that tends to be actually the steep part of the mountain, is just learning to keep the relational circuit on. Once people have that relational circuit online, it's usually not as hard as people feel it might be to have a sense of God's peace and God's presence. And in most cases, that actually is pretty doable once they can keep their relational circuit on. But our relational circuit goes off for lots of reasons, as you said. And that puts me Yeah, it puts me in a pretty tough place to try to figure out where is God's peace and God's presence. Because as long as I'm focusing on what scares me, what hurts me, what annoys me, that relational circuit will want to stay off.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like that pattern we see in some of the Psalms where the psalmist is in distress and it's a bad situation, but in the midst of his distress, he's remembering times of being in God's temple and worshiping God. By the end of it, he's praising God, and there's a sense of intimacy there. He still might be in the mess, but something shifted, and he's now has a sense of God's peace and God's presence, even though he might still be in the mess that he's in.
That's what I find so just comforting and amazing that, we study this brain science and it speaks about, as you call it, a joy switch, and how appreciation and gratitude primes our relational kind of circuits. And how all over in scripture, it talks about entering God's courts with praise and entering his presence with thanksgiving, and how there's joy in the midst of God's presence. And it's just like, well, all this ancient wisdom and truth that the Bible already had is just now being confirmed by the best ways of being human, by having these circuits on and all these types of things. So I started off with the question with, can you just turn on joy? And in one sense, no, you need to practice it. You need to cultivate joy. But when you cultivate it enough, then in a sense you can turn the relationship, you can just turn it back on. And there's those practices and ways of entering back into joy. And in other places, and maybe we'll have you on, and I know I'm going to talk with Jim Wilder too, but we also do need to kind of redefine what joy means. So we should have done that at the beginning, but just in 2 sentences, what for you does joy mean?
Yeah, joy means that we're glad to be together. So joy is different than happiness. Happiness can be kind of circumstantial. I could be happy because a new movie is coming out. Joy it's a relational concept. So when I see you, Jeff, your face lights up. When I first see you, I feel my face is smiling. Like that would be joy. It's this, we're glad to be togetherness. The glad to be togetherness is what I would call it. Like that's what we mean by joy. So it's authentic. It's genuine. It's not a fake it till I make it thing. It's just literally practicing this habit, this skill, so that your brain normalizes joy. So you can expect joy, expect the good stuff, and recover when there's an absence of joy. So joy with practice becomes that habit or that skill, so that it could be kind of our new normal, we might say. And it even gives us strength to get through some of the hard stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Well, just so please check out Chris's new book, Joy Switch: How Your Brain's Secret Circuit Affects Your Relationships and How You Can Activate It Today. Check out his Thrive Today site. Also, just to plug the book that my wife and I wrote, if you want like a high view biblical theology kind of understanding of joy and how it works throughout the biblical story, check out Does God Really Like Me? Discovering the God Who Wants to Be With Us by Sid and Jeff Holzclaw. But thank you so much for being on. And I know I'm going to invite you on again, probably not too far from now. So please say yes again.
I will. Thank you, Jeff. It's always good to hang out with you, man. I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Absolutely. This is the Being With podcast on neuroscience and faith. And we'll be bringing practitioners, researchers, theologians on the show just to talk about how God has made us and our minds and brains and how it interacts with faith.